What happens when a man facing unemployment stands before a judge who sees beyond the citation to the human being beneath? In a Providence courtroom that has witnessed thousands of cases, one particular morning would produce a moment so powerful that millions around the world would watch it unfold, their hearts moved by an act of compassion that defied every expectation. The fluorescent lights hummed softly overhead as another day began in Judge Frank Caprio's municipal courtroom. The familiar sounds of shuffling papers, muted conversations, and the steady rhythm of justice filled the air. But this wasn't just any courtroom. This was a place where something extraordinary happened almost daily, where the law met humanity in ways that restored faith in the justice system. Standing at the defendant's table was Marcus Thompson, a 34-year-old delivery driver whose calloused hands told the story of countless hours spent behind the wheel, racing against time to make ends meet. His uniform was crisp, but showed the wear of someone who took pride in his work despite the modest wages. The citation in question seemed simple enough, a parking violation that had escalated into something much more serious due to accumulated fines and late fees. Marcus shifted nervously, his eyes darting between the judge and the floor. This wasn't his first time in a courtroom, but it felt different somehow. The stories he'd heard about Judge Caprio had given him a sliver of hope, though he tried not to let it show. In his wallet was a photo of his two young daughters, ages 6 and 8, their bright smiles a stark contrast to the worry lines that had deepened on his face over the past months. The courtroom atmosphere was unlike the cold, intimidating spaces most people associated with legal proceedings. Judge Caprio's presence transformed the room into something more human, more approachable. His silver hair and kind eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses gave him the appearance of someone's grandfather rather than a figure of legal authority. Yet there was no mistaking the respect he commanded, not through fear, but through genuine care for every person who appeared before him. As Marcus's case was called, a hush fell over the courtroom. The gallery, filled with other defendants waiting their turn, seemed to lean forward collectively. There was something about this moment, this particular case, that felt different. Perhaps it was the way Marcus straightened his shoulders despite his obvious anxiety. Or maybe it was the gentle way Judge Caprio looked up from his papers, his expression already softening as he prepared to listen. The parking citation might have seemed trivial to some, just another case in an endless stream of municipal violations. But for Marcus, it represented something much larger. The difference between keeping his job and losing it, between providing for his family and watching his carefully constructed life crumble. His employer had made it clear that any legal troubles, even minor ones, could result in immediate termination. The delivery company's insurance policies were strict, and drivers with unresolved legal issues were considered liabilities. Judge Caprio had built his reputation on moments like these, seeing past the surface of each case to understand the real impact on real people. His courtroom had become famous not for harsh sentences or legal theatrics, but for something much rarer: genuine human compassion applied to the administration of justice. People came from across the state, sometimes from other states entirely, hoping to appear before the judge who had earned the nickname America's Nicest Judge. The morning sun streamed through the tall windows, casting long shadows across the wooden benches where family members, friends, and curious observers sat in quiet anticipation. This wasn't entertainment for them, it was hope. Hope that justice could be tempered with mercy, that the law could bend without breaking, that one person's compassion could make all the difference in another person's world. As Marcus approached the bench, his story was about to unfold in ways that neither he nor anyone in that courtroom could have imagined. The simple parking violation was about to become something much more significant, a testament to the power of listening, understanding, and choosing empathy over rigid enforcement. Judge Caprio glanced down at the paperwork, then back up at Marcus. With the same gentle attention he gave every defendant who stood before him. This moment of eye contact, so brief yet so meaningful, would soon prove to be the beginning of something extraordinary. No one in that courtroom expected what Judge Caprio would say next, least of all Marcus Thompson, whose life was about to change in ways that would resonate far beyond the walls of that Providence courthouse. Marcus Thompson's story began long before that parking citation brought him into Judge Caprio's courtroom. Born and raised in Providence, he had learned the value of hard work from his father, a factory worker who spent 30 years on the same assembly line before the plant closed down. Marcus had watched his father struggle to find new employment at 55, and the lesson wasn't lost on him. In today's economy, every job was precious, every paycheck a lifeline. After high school, Marcus had bounced between various jobs, retail, construction, food service, never quite finding his footing until he discovered delivery driving. There was something about being on the road, helping people get what they needed, that gave him a sense of purpose. He wasn't saving lives or changing the world, but he was making people's days a little easier, one package at a time. The pay wasn't great, but it was steady, and steady was what mattered when you had two little girls depending on you. Those girls, Sophia and Emma, had become the center of Marcus's universe when his wife left 3 years earlier. She'd said she couldn't handle the financial stress anymore, couldn't deal with the uncertainty of living paycheck to paycheck. The divorce had been amicable enough, but it left Marcus as the primary caregiver, juggling work schedules with school pickups, homework help with household chores. His mother helped when she could, but her own health problems limited what she could do. The parking violation that brought Marcus to court had occurred on one of those particularly challenging days. He'd received a call from Emma's school. She had fallen on the playground and needed to be picked up. Racing across town, Marcus had double-parked outside the school nurse's office, his hazard lights blinking as he ran inside. Emma's scraped knee wasn't serious, but she was crying and wanted her daddy. By the time he'd comforted her, filled out the incident forms, and carried her back to his delivery van, a parking enforcement officer was writing up the citation. Marcus had tried to explain, had shown the officer Emma's bandaged knee and the school incident report, but rules were rules. The fine was $75, not a fortune for most people, but for someone living as close to the financial edge as Marcus, it might as well have been $750. He'd fully intended to pay it, but that same week, Sophia needed new glasses, the van required emergency brake repairs, and his mother's medication costs had gone up again. The parking fine got pushed aside, then forgotten in the chaos of daily survival. Weeks turned into months, and the simple $75 fine had grown into something much more menacing. Late fees, processing charges, and administrative costs had transformed the original citation into a multi-hundred-dollar monster. Each notice that arrived in the mail felt like another weight added to his shoulders. Marcus had finally managed to scrape together enough money to address it, but by then the court appearance was mandatory. Most judges in similar courtrooms across the country would have seen Marcus's case as routine, another defendant who'd let a simple fine spiral out of control, another example of personal irresponsibility. The standard procedure would be to lecture him about the importance of handling legal obligations promptly, impose the full penalty plus additional court costs, and move on to the next case. Justice would be served, at least in the technical sense. But Judge Caprio's courtroom operated on different principles. He had built his reputation on understanding that behind every citation, every violation, every legal infraction, there was a human story worth hearing. He knew that sometimes people weren't irresponsible. They were overwhelmed, struggling, doing their best in impossible circumstances. As Marcus stood before the bench, his work uniform clean but showing the wear of someone who took pride in his job despite its modest pay, Judge Caprio could see something that other judges might have missed. This wasn't a man trying to game the system or avoid his responsibilities. This was a father trying to hold his world together one day at a time. The judge had seen thousands of cases over his career, but he'd never lost his ability to recognize genuine struggle. He'd grown up in Providence himself, understood the economic realities facing working families in the area. He knew that sometimes good people found themselves in bad situations through no real fault of their own, and that sometimes the law needed to be applied with wisdom rather than just strict adherence to procedure. Most judges would simply read the fine amount and ask how the defendant planned to pay. But Judge Caprio leaned forward, looked directly into Marcus's eyes with the kind of attention that made people feel truly seen, and asked a question that no one in the courtroom expected. "Tell me what happened that day. Help me understand your situation." The courtroom fell into that particular kind of silence that occurs when everyone senses they're about to witness something significant. Marcus Thompson looked up at Judge Caprio, momentarily surprised by the genuine interest in the judge's voice. He'd expected a rapid-fire proceeding, a quick judgment, and a hefty bill to somehow figure out how to pay. Instead, he found himself facing a man who actually wanted to hear his story. "Your Honor," Marcus began, his voice slightly hoarse with emotion, "I was picking up my daughter from school. She'd been hurt on the playground, and I just wanted to get to her as quickly as possible." He paused, gathering himself. "I know parking illegally was wrong, but she was crying for me, and I thought I'd only be inside for a minute." Judge Caprio nodded slowly, his expression thoughtful. "How old is your daughter?" "8, sir. Emma's 8. I also have Sophia. She's 6. Marcus reached into his wallet and pulled out the photo he always carried. "I'm raising them on my own since their mother and I divorced." The judge accepted the photo, studying it with the same careful attention he gave legal documents. The 2 little girls beamed at the camera, their joy infectious even in a still photograph. "Beautiful children," he said softly, then looked back at Marcus. "What kind of work do you do?" "I'm a delivery driver for Quick Ship Logistics. Have been for almost 4 years now." Marcus's voice carried a note of pride despite his circumstances. "I deliver medical supplies mostly, things hospitals and clinics need urgently. It's good work, important work." "And you're here today because you couldn't pay the original fine when it came due?" Judge Caprio's question carried no judgment, only understanding. Marcus nodded, his jaw tightening slightly. That same week, Sophia needed new glasses. Her prescription had changed significantly, and without them, she was having trouble in school. Then my delivery van needed brake repairs. If I couldn't drive, I couldn't work, and if I couldn't work. He let the sentence hang in the air. The courtroom remained remarkably quiet. Even the court reporters seemed to be typing more softly than usual, as if afraid to disturb the moment with unnecessary noise. In the gallery, other defendants waited their turn, but their attention was completely focused on the conversation unfolding at the bench. Judge Caprio leaned back in his chair, his fingers steepled in front of him, in a gesture that had become familiar to regular viewers of his courtroom proceedings. "Marcus," he said, using the defendant's first name, in a way that immediately broke down the formal barriers between judge and citizen. "Let me ask you something. If I were to dismiss this fine entirely, what would you do with the money you were planning to use to pay it?" The question caught Marcus off guard. He'd been preparing for lectures about responsibility, for payment plans that would stretch his already thin budget even thinner. He certainly hadn't expected to be asked about hypothetical scenarios involving dismissed fines. I don't understand, Your Honor." "It's a simple question," Judge Caprio said with a slight smile. "If you didn't have to pay this fine, what would you do with that money instead?" Marcus thought for a moment, his mind racing. "Well, sir, I'd probably put it toward Emma's school supplies. She needs new sneakers for gym class. Hers have holes in them. And Sophia could use some books. She loves to read, but we mostly rely on library books, and sometimes the ones she wants aren't available." Judge Caprio nodded approvingly. "And you'd continue doing your job, delivering medical supplies to hospitals and clinics?" "Yes, sir, absolutely. I love my work, knowing that what I'm carrying might help save someone's life. It makes the long hours worth it." The judge was quiet for a long moment, studying the paperwork in front of him, then looking back at Marcus with an expression that combined wisdom with genuine warmth. "You know, Marcus, I've been doing this job for a long time. I've seen thousands of people stand where you're standing right now. Some of them were trying to avoid responsibility, looking for easy ways out of situations they'd created for themselves." He paused, letting the weight of his words settle over the courtroom. "But some of them, people like you, were just trying to be good parents, good citizens, good people in circumstances that weren't entirely of their own making. The law doesn't always distinguish between these different types of people, but human judgment should—" Marcus held his breath, not daring to hope for what seemed to be building in the judge's words. "Instead of a fine," Judge Caprio continued, his voice carrying the authority of his position, but tempered with unmistakable compassion, "I'm going to ask you to do something else. I want you to go home tonight. Hug your daughters, help them with their homework, and remember that being a good father is one of the most important jobs anyone can have." The courtroom erupted in spontaneous applause, something that rarely happened in formal legal proceedings. Marcus stood frozen for a moment, unable to fully process what he'd just heard. "Case dismissed," Judge Caprio said with finality, bringing his gavel down in a gesture that seemed to echo with hope rather than judgment. "And Marcus, keep being the kind of man your daughters can be proud of. You're doing better than you think." As the applause died down and Marcus Thompson walked out of that Providence courtroom, something extraordinary had occurred that transcended the simple dismissal of a parking citation. In those few minutes of genuine human connection, Judge Frank Caprio had demonstrated something that our increasingly divided world desperately needed to witness: the transformative power of compassion applied to justice. The video of Marcus's case, like so many others from Judge Caprio's courtroom, would go on to be viewed millions of times across social media platforms. But the numbers only tell part of the story. In comment sections and shared posts around the world, people would express how witnessing this moment had restored their faith in humanity, in the possibility that systems designed to punish could also be used to heal. What made this case particularly powerful wasn't just the judge's decision to dismiss the fine. It was his recognition that Marcus Thompson represented something vital in our society. Here was a man who, despite facing economic hardship, personal challenges, and the daily stress of single parenthood, continued to show up every day with dignity and purpose. He wasn't asking for charity or making excuses. He was simply trying to navigate an impossible situation with grace and responsibility. Judge Caprio's approach to justice had always been rooted in the understanding that laws exist to serve humanity, not the other way around. Throughout his decades on the bench, he had consistently demonstrated that true justice requires wisdom to know when strict application of the law serves the greater good, and when mercy serves it better. His courtroom had become famous precisely because he understood this distinction and wasn't afraid to act on it. The ripple effects of cases like Marcus's extended far beyond the individuals directly involved. Other judges, inspired by Judge Caprio's example, began to consider how they might bring more humanity into their own courtrooms. Social workers, teachers, and community leaders pointed to these viral moments as examples of how institutional change could happen one interaction at a time, one person choosing to see the humanity in another. For Marcus Thompson himself, the impact went deeper than simply avoiding a financial penalty. In that moment, when Judge Caprio looked past the citation to see the man and the father, Marcus experienced something that had become rare in his interactions with institutions. He felt truly seen and valued. The judge's words about being a good father weren't just kind pleasantries. They were an affirmation from someone in authority that his daily struggles and sacrifices mattered, that his efforts to raise his daughters with love and integrity were recognized and respected. The story also highlighted something profound about the nature of second chances and how they should be distributed in our society. Marcus had made a choice that technically violated the law, parking illegally to quickly reach his injured daughter. But Judge Caprio recognized that this wasn't a choice made from disregard for rules or social responsibility. It was a choice made from love and parental instinct. The punishment didn't fit the crime because the crime was really just an act of caring that happened to conflict with parking regulations. This case became emblematic of Judge Caprio's broader philosophy that the justice system should distinguish between different types of law violations and different types of people. Someone who double parks to rush to an injured child deserves a different response than someone who habitually flouts parking rules out of convenience or entitlement. The law might treat these situations the same, but human judgment informed by compassion can and should make distinctions. Judge Caprio's legacy extends beyond his individual acts of kindness to encompass a different vision of what justice can be. His courtroom demonstrated that legal proceedings don't have to be cold, impersonal experiences that leave people feeling diminished or defeated. Instead, they can be opportunities for human connection, understanding, and even healing. They can be places where people's dignity is preserved even as they're held accountable for their actions. The worldwide attention that Judge Caprio's cases received also spoke to a deep hunger in our culture for examples of institutional compassion. People shared these videos not just because they were heartwarming, but because they offered a glimpse of how our systems could work if they were guided by empathy alongside enforcement. They showed that it's possible to maintain order and accountability while still treating people with kindness and respect. As news of Judge Caprio's retirement began to circulate, many wondered whether the unique spirit of his courtroom could be replicated elsewhere. The answer isn't found in specific legal procedures or policy changes, but in the recognition that every person who appears before any judge in any courtroom is a complete human being with their own story, struggles, and circumstances worthy of consideration. Judge Frank Caprio reminded us that justice isn't only about laws and penalties. It's about wisdom, compassion, and the recognition that sometimes the most powerful legal intervention is simply treating people with dignity and respect. In a world that often seems to have forgotten the value of kindness, his courtroom stood as a beacon of what becomes possible when authority is exercised with heart. This was just one case among thousands, but it exemplifies why millions around the world came to know Judge Caprio as America's nicest judge. Not because he was soft on crime or indifferent to the law, but because he never forgot that justice, at its best, serves humanity rather than simply punishing it. And that is the legacy he leaves behind. Thank you for watching this tribute to Judge Frank Caprio. If his story touched you, please share it with others, so his message of kindness and fairness can continue to inspire the world.